session will be in English, mainly because the subject is something that I've been queried or questioned on the Twitter a few times, and I didn't have any good material before, so I'm like tackling two things at the same time. So instead of traditional Finnish, this will be held in English. So topic is how to integrate CDM folders with Synapse on-demand SQL. The idea behind is that if you think about data flows, so Power BI data flows, they provide kind of business user oriented ETL tool. And this ETL, what it technically is that it reads from the whatever source is possible within the data flow and writes to the Azure Data Lake behind. And inside the data lake, it writes the data in CDM format. In future and already in upcoming months, there will be additional tools from Microsoft which also integrate quite heavily with the CDM format. So technically, if you are not familiar with the CDM format yet, you definitely should look into that because it's not going anywhere. It's more and more coming popular and popular. So in Power BI, we have a functionality called data flows. And data flows, this topic is not about introducing data flows. There are quite many good topics already in internet. So data flows in briefly is writing a Power Query statements or collection of Power Query statements, which then, if I open here a demo data flow like this one, I have few Power Queries which read from the source and write to the data lake. By default, the data lake is managed by Microsoft, but you can easily change it from the workspace settings that you would like to save it on your own data lake. And that's, of course, a prerequisite for this new function or the functionality I have developed to become alive. But one difficult, I have few customers who use very intensively data flows, and then they create Power BI models out of them. But the problem is that if and when they develop data flows in Power BI, they're not quite easily consumable by other products. So basically, how behind the scenes data flow looks like. So first of all, in Power BI Desktop, you would click Get Data and Data Flow, and you would get a list of possible data flows. And from here, it's quite easy that if I want to get, for example, that product entity, which was shown on the screen earlier, I could easily select from here and then load. That would be kind of simple task to do. I have a test table also here, which I could load. But if you would like to use these data sets on other tools, that's not the most obvious or easiest way to use. Microsoft has developed readers for certain languages, like Python, for example, has a already built-in CDM folder reader. So some programming languages can operate with the CDM structure, but there is like no easy querying interface or no easy, I would say, SQL endpoint for the data. So if we look for the now after importing to the Power BI, I could, for example, open the data and you can see that it managed to read from the source. But if we look in the behind the scenes data lake account, so I have that workspace I was using integrates with the storage account called QDataFlow, and inside there, Power BI automatically creates a container called Power BI. And inside there, you have a folder for workspace. So if we look from here, I was in a workspace called Synapse Integrated, and then that's the name of the workspace. Inside that, there are the name of the data flows. So I have few different data flows. If we go one step back, 3 data flows, and they are visible as folders over here. And then if I go inside certain data flow, I can see different entities plus few other items. So there is a model.json file, which actually describes what entities are, what their columns are, and finally, in which files the actual data is. So if I open the model.json file, it's actually looking something like this. So it has description of entities, that what type of entities I have. Then it has description of within each entity, what type of columns it has. And finally, within each entity, it has what's called partitions. And these partitions describe in which format the data actually is and where it currently is. As of now, all the Power BI imported data flows write the data in CSV, but technically it could be Parquet or whatever format possible. The kind of syntax allows that, but as of now, all of them are CSV. And if we look from the behind the scenes folder, we have kind of files which present the time when the loading was happening, or partitions when the loading is happening. Nevertheless, here we have a set of files which are referenced on this model.json. So, and the CSVs in particular are CSVs without the header. So we only have data columns and they are comma separated always. So that's kind of how the data flow works. When you load data from SQL Server or whatever source and you mash it, so you do some transformations, and finally, when the Power Query ends, it will save it as a CSV on the data lake storage account and describe where it is on this model.json file. Well, Synapse, on the other hand, can read CSVs. So we could implement a CSV kind of select statement over this one, but unfortunately there is no column descriptions. And on the other hand, we never know which of the CSVs is the current one if we don't parse it or somehow kind of interact and look at what's the newest one or something like that. So what I have done is that there is a stored procedure which takes 3 different parameters. So if we look within the Synapse database, stored procedure that takes 3 different parameters. It takes workspace name, it takes data flow name, and it takes the actual entity name. And then it goes through the folder structure and model.json file and others and generates the output view, which then can be exposed or is visible over the views list. So if I now select from the kind of system generated view, I can see that there are 7 rows on the test dataset. If we compare that to the Power BI, we can see that those 7 rows really are there. And if we then add one more row, so let's add one more row in the actual table, rerun the data flow. So it was this one. I will rerun or refresh the data. So what happens now is that I think it already went through. So it created one more CSV file and updated the model.json. So if I now within the Power BI desktop click refresh, I should see that that new row comes here. So now I have 8 rows. And if I look within the Synapse, so this one is connected to the on-demand Synapse instance. If I select from there, I still see 7 because that view is currently pointing to the old snapshot of the CDM data. So the CSV is the old CSV. But if I rerun the stored procedure, hoping that it will run in not that long, yes, and select again from the same view, I can see that the H row is now visible in the view. So with this simple stored procedure, you can expose all your data flows as on-demand SQL views, and then you can create SQL users or Azure Active Directory users and grant select possibility for whatever tool that can actually read from the SQL server could actually read from those CDM files. There is no technical limitation why it would be only limited to Power BI. So those same stored procedure can be used for any other CDM tool, but as of now, kind of within the Microsoft, there is in production usage, there is no other kind of analysis tool for handling CDM data in data flows in Azure Data Factory data flows. We have a CDM insert capability, but that's something that is kind of still requires some work to happen, and it's in preview. So when that comes to GA, probably it will be easier, but nevertheless, it's still not possible within the on-demand SQL, the Synapse on-demand SQL, to read those files. So you would need kind of some kind of logic to do that, and that's the one I have created. If you would like to get this code, you can get it from the vesa.vs, click blog, and you can write find it from there. There's an instruction regarding how this works, and then there is that code. It's actually visible from the GitHub also. So that's where you can find all the kind of required entities. If you look for the size of the files, you can see that it's not that big, but nevertheless, with this small script, you can actually enable kind of big data queries over the Synapse over the Power BI data flow datasets. And why would that be important? In this other customer case, which I was working, data flows by definition are not probably the best choice for example, merging two big data sets. So if you kind of load data from on-premise sources, that's working pretty well, even in a bigger data sets. But when joining with Power Query two big data sets, if you don't get the query folding functionality, which kind of runs the statement behind the scenes on SQL, if that's not available for you, for example, you need to do some transformations for the datasets before joining, and then you are in a Power Query object level join, you pretty soon find that Power Query is not the optimal way to join large datasets, meaning millions of rows against millions of rows. But with the Synapse, it's actually quite easy and quite fast to do that. So it could actually be that if your company has already invested into the data flows, you could still use them to the loading activity, but then to the final transformation or joining the data sets together within the SQL using the on-demand SQL. So at least on this other customer case, it was something they were looking for. Thank you.